Well, hey, everybody, this is Heidi St. John, and you have found me right here at the intersection of faith and culture. And you guys are in for a huge treat today because my friend, Dr. Gary Chapman, the author of The 5 Love Languages, is joining me today to talk a little bit about why it's so important that we learn to speak the love languages of the people that we love in our lives. This was an absolute treat and a joy for me to interview Dr. Chapman. I know you're going to love it. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So, Dr. Chapman, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you're here.
Well, thank you, Heidi. It's great to be with you.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time because you don't know me, obviously, but I know you. I know at least your work, and I'm a super fan. So I read a long time ago, The 5 Love Languages, used it with all 7 of my children, and my daughters now are using them with their children. So it's exciting to see the sort of generational impact that your work has had. Do you sit back and go, wow, that's amazing? Because I'm guessing that when you discovered it, you never really realized this is going to have an incredible impact.
Well, I did not know that what has happened would happen, but I did know that the concept would help people because I had discovered it and been using it in my counseling for a number of years before I wrote the book. And it really grew out of my counseling. I'll never forget the first time it dawned on me that what makes one person feel loved doesn't make another person feel loved. There was a couple who came in. I'd never met them. I found out later they'd been married to each other for 30 years. And they sat down and the wife said, Dr. Chapman, let me just tell you a little bit about us before we start. She said, we don't argue. We don't believe in arguing. We don't have any money problems. She said, I read an article that said money's the biggest problem in marriage. She said, not for us. And she went on with about 3 or 4 more positive things. And I was beginning to wonder, did they come in to tell me what a good marriage they have? But then she started crying. And she said, but the problem is, I just don't feel any love coming from him. We're like roommates living in the same house. He does his thing, I do my thing. And there's nothing going on between us. And she said, I feel so empty inside. And she said, I just don't know how long I can go on like this. Well, I looked at her husband, and he said, I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her. And she sits there and tells you what she's been telling me. She doesn't feel loved. He said, I don't know what else I can do. I said, well, what do you do to show your love to her? He said, well, I get home before she does in the afternoon, and I start the evening meal. Sometimes I actually have it ready when she gets home. If not, she'll help me. Then after we eat, I wash the dishes. Every Thursday night, I vacuum the floors. Every Saturday, I mow the grass, I wash the car, I help her with the laundry, and he went on. And Heidi, I was beginning to wonder, what does this woman do?
I was just thinking, I'm pretty sure you described a whole lot of women's dream husband right there.
That's right.
And he's doing the dishes. I mean, everyone knows that's the precursor to a whole bunch of other better things, right?
And so, and I look back at her and she said, Dr. Chapman, he's right. He is a hardworking man. She said, but we don't ever talk. We haven't talked in 20 years. Said he's always mowing the grass, washing the dishes, vacuuming the floors, always doing something. And I realized here was a sincere husband who was doing everything he knew to do to show love to her, and a wife who didn't get it. And after that, I heard similar stories over and over in my office. So I knew there had to be a pattern to what I was hearing, but I had no idea what it was. So eventually, I took time to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and ask myself the question, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages. And I started using that in my counseling. If you want her to feel loved, you've got to learn to express love in her language. And if you want him to feel love, you've got to learn his language. And I would help couples discover each other's language, challenge them to go home and try it, And sometimes they would come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is really making a difference. This is really changing the atmosphere. And then I started sharing it with groups of couples, and the same thing happened. Probably 5 years later, I thought, if I could put this concept in a book, write it in the language of the common person, leave out psychological terms that many people would not understand,
right?
Maybe I could help a lot of couples that I would never have time to see in my office. So that's where it came from. That's what motivated me to write it. Of course, little did I know that it would it would now sell more than 20 million copies and be published in more than 50 languages around the world. Absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, it's you can see how needed it is. And even I was at a bridal shower not that long ago, and there were women who were giving advice to the bride-to-be. And at least 2 of them said, you need to learn to speak your husband's love language, because you can just speak your own. And you think, like, for me, of course, I raised 7 children. And so everyone knows my love language just by looking at me. It's acts of service. Like, if you want to love Heidi St. John, wash the dishes, right? You want to help me, clean up the house, whatever it is. And my husband has he feels loved in a very different way. But it was so interesting to watch these women giving this young bride-to-be advice to let her know what makes you feel loved may not make your husband feel loved. And I think people still struggle to understand that.
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. We just assume that if I'm expressing love in a way that's meaningful to me, it will be meaningful to you. And that's just a false assumption. And we have to recognize that. And I think, I had mentioning young brides. I've had several times people say to me, Dr. Chapman, when we had our shower before we got married, the gifts from people, we got 4 copies of the 5 love languages. I said, well, those are 4 people that love you, and they want you to know how to love each other.
Yeah, it's really true. And I wonder, these love languages now, and let's go over them really quickly because there are 5 of them.
Yeah.
And what are they? I mean, I could say them, but it's so much more meaningful coming from you.
Okay, all right. And they're in no particular order of importance, okay? But one is words of affirmation. You look nice in that outfit. I appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you, it's just using words to affirm the other person. There's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the power of the tongue.
Boy, it's true.
We can kill people. We can give them life by the way we talk to them. For some people, words of affirmation is their love language. And then there's acts of service, doing something for the other person that they would like for you to do. That's what the gentleman was speaking. And that's the language he was speaking. He was doing all these things for his wife. And
he would have probably liked it if she would have done that for him, right? That's what would have meant something that's been meaningful to him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he didn't complain about it, but likely he didn't feel loved either because she wasn't speaking that language. And all he was hearing was condemning words from her, So acts of service. And there's an old saying, actions speak louder than words. Well, if this is their love language, that's true. It's not true for everyone, but it is true for these people. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got from me. And the gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But I like to remind couples, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head, okay? So there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. My academic background before I studied counseling and theology was cultural anthropology. I did an undergrad and a master's. Studying cultures all over the world, how they're organized. We've never found a culture where gift giving is not an expression of love. Universal. And then number 4 is quality time. Giving the person your undivided attention. I do not mean husband and wife sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm saying the TV is off, the computer is down, we're not answering our phone, we're giving each other our full attention, talking and listening to each other. And it doesn't have to be sitting there. You can be taking a walk down the road and talking, or going out to eat, assuming that you talk. We've all seen this in the restaurant, couples sitting across the table, They each have their phone out answering their text messages. That's not quality time.
Yep. I've done it. I'm guilty. I've done it.
And then number 5 is physical touch. And we've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies, hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. Long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. So in a marriage, we're talking about such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of the marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, sitting around the house, and they walk by and you trip them. I'm kidding.
It was a love trip.
Erase that one. So those are the 5 love languages.
Is it different? I was thinking about how social media and the fact that, I've got my phone in my office with me, Yeah. I was thinking, how have you noticed, because I would imagine you've seen a major shift as someone who works in counseling and you work in, your job is to help people inside of relationships. How much has changed since the advent of the smartphone?
Well, there are some good changes. FaceTime. When I'm out of town, I can not only talk to my wife now, I can look at her and talk to her. That's nice. And I can send photos of something that I've seen that day, and she can do the same to me. So there are some positive things about it. On the other side, there are downsides. And I think we tend to become obsessed with our phone. We always have it with us, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but it should not be controlling our behavior. And and many times it is. If the phone rings, no matter what we're doing, many times we just stop doing what we're doing and we answer the phone. So if you're having a conversation, for example, with your spouse, and your cell phone rings and you answer it, you've just communicated someone out there is more important than you. Now, I know that's not what we're thinking, but that's what and what happens is when she hears you starting a conversation with the other person, then your spouse just walks out of the room and say, well, that conversation's over. And you probably won't pick it up because you go on and get involved in doing something else. So, and if quality time is their language, primary language, and you do that, man, it's very detrimental to the relationship.
Yeah, I think, we've looked at all 7 of our children, tried to figure out how do we fold them where they're bent and love them how they need to be loved. And that is the hardest one. And I think a lot of moms can relate to this. And I'm kind of curious your thoughts on it. For me, I have at least 3 of our 7, their love language is quality time.
Yeah.
And for a mother or someone who's as busy as I am, I'm like, please let your gift be something else. Please let your language be something else. Anything but quality time. I'll buy you a car. What do you need? But what do you do when you realize, okay, as a mother, especially, let's talk to the moms for a minute. And she realizes, okay, I've got 3 children whose love language is quality time. They need more time of me. And she feels really pulled. And she feels like, man, I'm doing the best I can. I'm serving these kids. A lot of the women who listen to the show are homeschool moms. So they're homeschooling their children. Yeah. And so you're tired at the end of the day, right? Because you're kind of spent. Have you ever, I'm sure you have, but think about people that come and they struggle with how to incorporate that into a really busy life.
Well, I think it's a challenge for anyone, and especially if you have, as you say, 7 children or 5 children or 4 children. It's a little easier if you only have 2 children. It's a little easier. The more children you have, the greater the challenge in terms of time, no matter what their language is. But I do think as parents, what we have to do is to talk to ourselves. What is most important at this stage in my life? And sometimes it means we have to let some other things go in order to have time to give quality time to our children. And I greatly affirm homeschool mothers. I mean, I was in a restaurant not long ago, and a lady walked in at lunchtime with 8 children, and then later her husband joined her. And when I got ready to leave, I just stopped at their table and I said, "Excuse me, can I ask you a personal question?" I said, "Are these all your children?" And she smiled and said, "Yes." And I said, "And do you homeschool them?" Because it was lunchtime, And she said, "Yes." And I said, God bless you.
Good. You probably made her day. I bet you made her year. There's not a homeschool mom on the planet that doesn't want that to happen in a restaurant for sure.
But I think a mother, what she has to do is recognize at this stage in my life, this is most important to me. And therefore, I'm going to give myself to this. Now, homeschooling is not for everybody. I understand that also. Some parents are just not equipped to do that. But the quality time child does need quality time. Now, I think, and if we give them quality time, we don't have to be with them all the time. I've sometimes given this illustration. The child, you're fixing dinner, for example, and the child said, "Mommy, can we play? Can we play?" And you say, "Honey, I've got to finish dinner right now. You run along and we'll play later." And they're back in 2 minutes. Well, can we play now? Can we play now? That child is telling you quality time is their language. So my suggestion is give them quality time before you start the dinner. Go play a game with them and then say, "Now, Mommy has to do dinner, so you can be doing this, or whatever, And chances are they're far more likely to do that because you fill their love tank before you started the dinner. So I think understanding things like that can help a mother be able to do the other things that she needs to be doing, as well as meet that child's need for love.
How do, we're obviously this is in your book, but I want to just chat about it for a second. To the parents who are trying to figure out what is the love language of my child, or the husband who's listening to this going, I wouldn't know my wife's love language if she hit me on the head with it because I just haven't been paying attention. And here we are, like you just said, 30 years into our marriage, and there's a distance between us. How do we bridge that gap? How do you find out what someone's love language? Did you ask them? Do you just pick up the book and go through it with them? And what's your suggestion? Because I know in my life, this has made a huge difference for me. My husband and I are celebrating our 35th anniversary this summer. And now we've got, grandbabies coming out our ears. And I notice that largely because I understood from a long time ago about the love language, it really makes a difference. But there are still a lot of people out there going, I just don't know how to bridge the gap. I wouldn't know how to identify it. Where do we start?
Yeah. Well, I think ideally it would be for a husband and wife to work through the book together. And so they're both being exposed to the concept at the same time. And as they're working through it, as you get to each of the chapters on the love languages, you'll be able to share with each other, well, that one doesn't mean as much to me as this one. So it's just an easy, normal flow of things. But here are 3 informal ways of determining a person's love language. One is observe their behavior. How do they typically relate to other people? If they're always giving words of affirmation to other people, probably that's what they want to receive. It's not always true, but it's a clue that what they're giving is what they want to receive. And then secondly, what do they complain about most often? The complaint reveals the love language. If a wife is saying to a husband, I just feel like we don't ever have any time together anymore. I feel like we're just ships passing in the night. She's telling him quality time is my language. And what do you complain about most often? Because you're revealing your love language. If a husband says, I don't think you would ever touch me if I didn't initiate it, he's telling her that physical touch is his language. So what do they complain about? And then what do they request most often? For example, if they're saying periodically, honey, can we take a walk after dinner? They're asking you for quality time. Mm-hmm. Or if a wife is saying to a husband, how does this look? Talking about her clothes. How does this look? She's asking for words of affirmation. She's not wanting him to say, you look awful. She's wanting him to say, honey, no matter what you have on, you look nice.
That's right. That's right. My husband will sometimes say, if he forgets how many years we've been married, because occasionally this happens, right? Someone will say, oh, you and Heidi, how long have you been married? And if he can't remember, he'll go, not long enough.
I like that.
With a little pro tip.
Yeah. But you put those 3 things together, you can pretty well figure out your own language and the other person's language. Of course, for adults, there's a free quiz at 5lovelanguages.com, the website. Number 5, 5lovelanguages.com. A free quiz for married couples, a free quiz for single adults, a free quiz for teenagers, and some suggestions on how to work with younger children. And I just throw this out from others. Typically, you can discover a child's primary love language by the time they're 4 years old by observing their behavior. How do they relate to you? My son's love language, for example, is physical touch. When he was that age, I would come home in the afternoon. He would run to the door, grab my legs, and climb on me.
Yep.
He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. Our daughter would say, Daddy, come into my room. I want to show you something. She wanted quality time. So you observe that child, what they're, how they relate to you. Pretty good clue that that's their primary language.
Now, will that change? Do you think that it stays the same throughout their life, that that's their primary? Because I'm assuming we can have more than one, but there will always be one that's dominant. But if we notice it in a child, is it likely to stay that way their entire lives, or do you think it usually will change?
I think it does tend to stay with us. However, and here's the question I'm often asked, Dr. Chapman, we read your book on the 5 love languages of children. It was so helpful. But now our child's a teenager. And they ask me, does it change when they get to be teenagers? And I say, I don't think the love language changes, but you have to speak new dialects of that language because what you've been doing, they consider to be childish now. So you've been giving them little words about how you look so wonderful and so sweet and all these things. And you got to learn more adult words. And, when they were little, the physical touch was their language. You could hug them anywhere, anytime. You could run out on the ball field and hug them.
Right.
To be teenagers, ooh, no. Don't hug me out here. You have to hug them in private. Yeah. And you also have to pick up on their mood because in the morning, they might receive a hug from you as a teenager. In the afternoon, if some things happen at school and they're kind of down, have low feelings, and you try to hug them, they may push you away. So you have to kind of play it by ear. So I'd say if your teenager their language is physical touch and they walk up close to you, good time to hug them. If they're standing on the other side of the room and kind of upset, not the time to hug them. So we have to learn new dialects as they're.
In other words, you're telling the parents. The parents need to learn to read the room, right?
That's right.
Read the room. If your kid is standing over there and they look a little pouty or a little irritated, probably not the time to go up and just, bring it in, right?
That's right. That would be the time to ask them, what's going on? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And let them kind of share where they are in their day. Now, then you get a better picture of where they are.
So good. It's so important. What counsel do you have for, let's say there's a married couple or maybe just one of the partners listening to this right now and they're discouraged because they feel alone in the marriage or they feel like, oh, hey, I've never learned to speak my husband's love language, or maybe a husband's thinking, my wife never learned mine. And it's been so long now. Is it ever too late to start learning to speak the love language of your spouse?
I don't think it's ever too late for 2 reasons. Number one, we are humans. Humans are constantly changing for the good or for the bad. We're getting better or we're getting worse.
It's true.
And secondly, as humans, we have choices to make. And as Christians, we have outside help. Because Jesus said, not only love somebody that's loving you, but love your enemy. So even if your husband or wife is an enemy, he's saying love them. And here's what I found. If a wife says to God, Lord, my husband, I don't have any positive feelings for him. He hasn't met my needs, but I know you love him and I'm married to him. So I'm opening my heart, and will you pour your love into me? And let me be your agent for loving him. And remember, this kind of love is it doesn't start with a feeling. And Romans chapter 5 and verse 5 says the love of God is poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit. So you can be God's agent for loving your husband in the right language. We've always said you can't change your spouse, and that's true. You can't make your spouse change, but you can influence them. And one of the greatest positive influences is loving your spouse when they're not loving you. You're not feeling love, but you're reaching out to love them in their language over an extended period of time. And because you are beginning to touch them emotionally, something happens inside of them, and they begin to ask you questions. What can I do to help you? And now you can teach them how to express love to you. It's powerful. I have seen marriages where they had no hope. And I said to them in the counseling context, I said, I understand that. I know how you can get there where you just lose hope. But would you be willing to go on my hope? Because I have hope for you. And if you're willing to go on my hope, we'll try some things to see what can happen. And if they will and begin to change some things, it can be amazing what can happen. But I do think the greatest challenge that any married person has is loving a spouse who will not go for counseling, who will not read a book, who will not even talk about us. That's the greatest challenge. But with the help of God, we can love them even when they're not loving us. Because let's face it, God loved us while we were still sinners and sent Christ to die for us. Yeah.
It's so important. I wrote it down. I love that you said, you may not have the hope, but I do. And if you'll go on my hope, we can take this journey together. I love that. I love it so much. And I was thinking as you're speaking about relationships that we have with our children as they get older, and like a mother to a new daughter-in-law, and she's trying to figure out, I just cannot connect with this young woman who is now married to my son, and I want to build this relationship. What is your counsel? Because I bet you've seen this a lot, right? Where the relationship, especially between mothers and sons, changes quite a bit as that son gets to be an adult man, which is right, and it should. But how does a mother then transition into a season where her kids are now getting married and they're establishing their own families and learn to speak a language that her new son-in-law or daughter-in-law would understand?
Well, I think, first of all, I would make sure that you give them the 5 love languages book when they get married for their own benefit. Okay. Then they read that even before they get married. They have that concept so that when you then later say to your son, for example, what is your wife's love language? What really speaks to her? Well, he by that time would probably know, and he would say, well,
he can tell you.
Yeah, and he will tell you. Now that you have that information, at least what's more likely to be received by her coming from you. Because if you simply love her in a way that you would like to be loved if you were a young bride, and you kind of feel put off, or she's not accepting it, that's because it's not her language. It's not as meaningful to her as it would be meaningful to you. So your adult son is in the best position to tell you what his wife's love language is. Because the primary love language is going to be true coming from you as the same as coming from him in a close family relationship. Yeah.
And it really does change. I mean, once you start connecting the dots and you realize, I guess until I figured this out, I was doing things for other people that would be meaningful to me, would bless me. And I was encouraged by it. And I thought, man, I'm working so hard and I'm trying to love you the best way I can. And I'm not getting good feedback for it, and then you start to get frustrated, right? Yeah. And then you tend to sort of give up. And I see so many relationships kind of go off into the ditch because both of them are trying, they're genuinely trying, but they're not able to speak the other person's language. It's just so important. You said earlier that this book has been printed. How many times has it been printed now?
Well, it's sold 20 million copies.
That's crazy town. That's amazing. And it's universally known all around the world. How have you seen this help people just around the world? Because it's not just here in the United States. This book is impacting the lives of millions of people around the globe, which is kind of an amazing work of the Spirit.
It is. As a matter of fact, that surprised me more than anything that it went to other cultures. Because of my background in cultural anthropology, I'm sensitive to cultural differences. In fact, I said to my publisher, the Spanish publisher was the first to come to get the rights. And I said to my publisher, I don't know if this works in Spanish culture. I said, I discovered this kind of middle America here, They said, well, they've read the book and they want to publish it. I said, well, okay, then let's go with it. Well, they became their bestseller, So, in fact, I was at a meeting just recently, and a young lady from Venezuela was there. It was here in the States, and she said, Dr. Chapman, you have no idea the impact you're making in Venezuela. She said, your book is all over the country, and people are talking about it all the time, And so That sort of thing, it just amazed me. People have asked me, Gary, how do you account for the fact that the book's been out 30 years now, and it keeps selling more every year than it did the year before? That doesn't happen to books. And I said, well, from my perspective, the short answer is God. And the long answer is God. I said, I could not have made this happen if I wanted to make it happen. It's just been a God thing. But I think on the human level, what's happened is people read it, the lights come on,
yep,
and then they start speaking each other's language, and then they want their brother and his wife, their sister and her husband. It's just gone word of mouth all over the world. Because it's meeting what most of us believe is one of our deepest emotional needs as humans, is the need to feel loved by the significant people in our lives.
Boy, it's true. Was there a moment or a scenario or story that you heard that just that stuck with you? It stayed with you from all of the stories that you've heard of people that have read your book and their lives have been impacted by it? Well,
I've had numerous people come up to me when I do marriage seminars. I do Saturday marriage conferences all over the country. And almost every Saturday when I do one of those, I'll have one or two couples come up and say, Gary, we just want to share with you, this book saved our marriage. 20 years, someone will say 20 years ago, we were at the point of divorce. And somehow somebody gave us your book and it just turned things around. So that's just, I've heard that over and over and over again. And I think the reason they're saying that is because they were at the point of giving up and they didn't feel loved by each other. And then their differences emerged and they were arguing with each other. And so I understand how people can get there. But I do think it's a simple concept, but it can revolutionize a marriage.
Boy, so good. Dr. Gary Chapman, you are a national treasure, and I am so honored to have you here at the show today. And just to encourage my listeners, if people want to find out more about you and get your book, what's the best place for them to do that?
They can go to the website, 5lovelanguages.com. And there they will find a little synopsis of all of my books. And there's many spinoffs from this. You know, we mentioned 5 Love Languages of Children. There's 5 Love Languages of Teenagers. There's one for the teenager, a teen's guide to the 5 love languages. There's a singles edition for single adults. There's a military edition. And then there's special editions for like families where there's a special needs child, special book for couples that have an adopted child, one for step parents and stepchildren, and one for people who are suffering from dementia, keeping love alive as memories fade. So it's applying the love languages in a lot of different, settings. But they can find all of that at 5lovelanguages.com.
At 5lovelanguages.com. I've got one more question for you, since you just brought up all this plethora of other books that go along with it. How important would you say it is? Like, there are lots and lots of parents listening to this right now who maybe they're just struggling to understand. Like, for me, it was a game changer when I learned that my kids learn differently, right? That one of my kids was a kinesthetic learner, and one of them was a visual learner, and one of them's an auditory learner. And once I figured that out, bam, it was a game changer for me for homeschooling, because it was like somebody opened the door to their heart and mind, and I could just walk right in and start teaching again, right? Yeah. But this is sort of a similar thing, but for emotions and for relationships. How important do you think it is that parents learn to speak the love language of their child? This isn't something that we can just go, it doesn't really matter. It's actually foundational.
It is. In fact, I say to parents often, the question is not, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved?
Oh, good.
By nature, we love our children. But the question is, do they feel loved? I remember a 13-year-old young man had run away from home. He ended up in my office, and he said to me, among other things, my parents don't love me. They love my brother, but they don't love me. I knew his parents. I knew they loved him. The problem is they had never discovered what his language was. They weren't speaking love in a way that was meaningful to him. So it's exceedingly important that we learn the child's primary love language. And then I like to say to parents, that doesn't mean that you only speak that primary language. No, all the others are fine. You can throw in. But if you don't speak the primary language in a consistent way, they won't feel loved, even though you're speaking some of the other languages.
So your kids can have, one or two or even three of those love language. I would imagine. I don't think my love language is gifts, but I like it when people give me, bring me a gift. But you're saying you really need to hone in on what that primary love language is and learn to become fluent in it.
Absolutely. And speak it on a regular basis. And when you do, then the others are fine. The others are, we like the child to understand that there are different ways to receive love. And for some people, it's hugs. And I know it's not yours, but I'm going to hug you. So we're communicating to them this concept as they grow up. And if they get to adulthood and they've had this concept as they were growing up, they're going to be better prepared for marriage.
Boy, so good. Dr. Chapman, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's just been a delight to have you and such a treat for me to be able to meet you in person and just say thank you for the work that you've done that I know has been incredibly influential in millions and millions of relationships around the world. Thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you, Heidi. It was good to be with you, and keep up the good work. I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much. For more information on my guest today, go to HeidiSt.John.com/podcast, and I will scroll down to these links in the show notes today. You guys, love your people well. You've got one chance when you raise your children to let them know how much you love them. Learn to speak their love language and watch how it changes your life. Thank you guys so much for listening today. I'll see you right back here again at the intersection of faith and culture.